Welcome again, everyone. My name is Jessica Desarden. I am a program coordinator in the Office of Community Engagement. We are thrilled to be back for the January edition of the CE Spotlight series. I'd like to begin with a statement from the Office of Community Engagement. We wish to acknowledge the Indigenous people who are past and present stewards of the land on which we pursue our just cause of improving health for all. Please note this session is being recorded, and please be sure you are muted throughout the presentation. We encourage everyone to use the chat bar to share comments or pose questions for our guests at any time. This monthly series features community partners and the important work they are doing. We highlight their goals, motivations, and accomplishments, and the ways they have partnered with people and programs at the Medical College of Wisconsin. At this time, I would like to introduce our Senior Associate Dean for Community Engagement, Dr. Stacy Young, who will say a few words about our featured guest. Dr. Young?
Thanks, Jessica. Great to see everybody. Happy New Year. Hope everyone is staying warm. Thanks for joining us today. I have the honor to introduce today's featured guest, Kristin Belkofer, founding CEO. She's the founding CEO and clinical director of CLARA Healing Institute, a holistic, multifaceted mental health private practice in Wauwatosa. CLARA's treatment model includes three branches of service: clinical services, Wisdom Collective, and Community Circle. Through its partnership with the MCW Division of Suicide Prevention, Suicide Research and Healing, CLARA provides group art therapy services for survivors of suicide loss. Thank you, Kristin, for being our featured guest today. I would now like to welcome today's facilitator, Dr. Sarah Kolbeck. Dr. Kolbeck is the director of the Division of Suicide Research and Healing in the Comprehensive Injury Center here at MCW. Her research focuses on understanding suicide from a public health perspective. She conducts research that focuses on better understanding suicide in order for us to better understand suicide among disproportionately affected populations, including farmers, veterans, and youth of color. Thank you, Dr. Kolbeck, for being our facilitator today. I now turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Young. Really appreciate the opportunity to highlight this amazing partnership. And I have to say, any partnership meeting that starts off with Bjork is really good in my book. So thank you, Kristin, for that amazing music choice this morning. It definitely energized me and got me ready for this conversation. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yes, it was great. It was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't see that email come through. So when I was like, oh, this is Bjork, that's amazing.
Yeah, I was thinking my 13-year-old self would be really happy.
Yeah, same. That's amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for being here today and for having this conversation for us. And to get us kicked off, I'm just really interested for you to just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and what has brought you to this work.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me and inviting me to have this conversation. It's lovely to be able to reflect upon all of these things that we've been able to do over the past 5 years at CLARA. We actually just recently had our 5-year anniversary. So it was nice to be able to kind of slow down and take a look at everything from a bigger picture. So I'm really just proud to be here and happy to have the opportunity to share about how our partnership has deeply enriched a lot of the work that we do here at CLARA. And yes, I am also happy to hear that, there's other Bjork fans around. And if you're not familiar, check her out. She's an amazing Icelandic singer that has tons and tons of music, and she's just an amazing person and artist. But yeah, I'd be happy to share just a little bit about myself as well as the practice, CLARA Healing Institute. So as Dr. Young said, I'm the founding CEO and clinical director for CLARA Healing Institute, and we're a group private practice mental health clinic that's located in the Wauwatosa village. We're actually just down the street on Harwood from the main MCW Freighter Children's campus area. And as she also mentioned, we do have 3 branches of service that we engage our clients in the community from. So the first is our clinical services, and we have a team of at this point, I believe we're actually just onboarding a new therapist this week, which is very exciting. But right now, I think we're at 7 clinicians. So we have a small but mighty group of clinicians with a diverse range of experience here. But what ties us all together are a lot of common practice values and some foundational values regarding our like our theoretical orientation and how we practice. So I'd say that everybody here to some degree has experience with something in the creative arts or the creative background, as well as interest in the holistic mind, body, soul connection. And so many of us practice from quite a holistic framework where we're looking at not only the individual, but the individual in context of their community, as well as all these other facets of their experience. So our clinical services, we do a lot of individual therapy across the lifespan. We are, like I said, we just onboarded a new therapist. We're in the process of doing that, and they are going to be specifically working with children and adolescents. But from a whole team perspective, we work with folks. Oops. Better turn that off. From a from a from a sort of lifespan perspective, we work with folks, as young as 4 or 5 years old, kind of in the context of their family and family support in that way. And then we also serve, adults, teens, couples, relationships of all kinds, and organizations and other community agencies as well. Our Wisdom Collective is our second branch of service, and that is the part of our practice that focuses on doing interdisciplinary training and education for other professionals. So that might be other mental health professionals, but we also really like working with health professionals of all kinds, as well as the greater community. So we're working on we recently developed a course and program for parents to better understand and navigate their children and adolescents' digital world that they're living in. We're developing some courses for art therapy and neuroscience, as well as professional women who are living with ADHD. And our final branch is called Community Circle. And I would say that that's sort of, if I had to kind of look at our model, that's essentially how we connected with MCW is our Community Circle is the space of our practice where we offer either low cost or no cost services to folks in the community as is needed. And we provide group programming, creative arts workshops, and other ways to engage the public. And essentially, like part of that is intended to break down the stigma of coming to a mental health therapy clinic. A lot of folks that come to see us, they actually engage with us first by some sort of programming, community programming here, which we really enjoy, and we try to have more of that atmosphere at our practice.
Great. Yeah, I think I love the kind of 3 areas of focus in your practice. And I think one of the things that I really find unique about the work that you all, there's a lot of really wonderful and great things about the work you do, but one of the things I find unique is sort of that orientation to education and beyond sort of the individual kind of psychotherapy that takes place at your practice. You also do a lot of work to educate the community around these tough issues. I know on social media, I was really interested in your programming around, youth and teens and kind of their screen time and social media. So I think that is such an interesting and, again, unique part of your practice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, it was intentional in building CLARA. That's why we refer to it as an institute, and that it's a place where you essentially come, if you're coming for clinical services and therapy, you're essentially learning about yourself, engaging in that, deeper process of learning and developing your relationship with yourself, family members, your significant other, but also like learning about why our human experience feels the way that it does, why we feel safe around certain folks and maybe not so much around others. So I'm glad that that's something that resonates.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious kind of how you came to be involved in the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like many folks that wind up in the mental health world, I didn't have a very linear path, but I sort of I followed sort of my opportunities and life circumstances that kind of came in front of me that sort of like illuminated and clarified like what I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to create something. And from a very young age, I've always identified as an artist. And that's sort of like a core part of me. But I knew I wanted to do that in sort of a way that really hadn't been done before. And I kind of apply that in an interesting way. So to that point, I originally actually went to art school. I am technically an art school dropout. So my first round of school was going to the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design here. And what I learned through that process is that it's a lovely art school that I would recommend to anybody who wants to focus on that. But it helped me learn a lot about myself. That I'm actually a lot less of an introvert than I thought I was. And it helped me realize that I wanted to have more sort of face-to-face community connection points where I could either use, the experience of art making or connecting with others through viewing art or whatever to make a difference in the community around me that I, was beginning to become very keyed into all of the, difficult things about what makes it hard to live in our society for many, many people. And so I actually, while I was in my first year of college, I became pregnant with my son, who's now 23, just turned 23. And that, was an interesting sort of pivotal life moment for me because, I took a pause from school, but it really helped me kind of clarify what I wanted to do and what I was really passionate about and interested in. And that was actually up until that point, I actually didn't really know much about art therapy at all. It wasn't something that was really on my radar. But while I was taking that time off to, have my son and raise him when he was really young, I was thinking, okay, maybe I want to. At the time a really strong passion and still for survivors of sexual violence. And so I started volunteering and doing some advocacy work for the Healing Center, which is a part of Aurora. And through that, actually learned more about art therapy as a profession and as a modality and approach for working with survivors. And so that really inspired me to then study art therapy. That's what I have my undergrad in. And along that road, started to feel like, oh, maybe I could be okay at this sort of clinical end of things. It wasn't necessarily what I had originally anticipated, but I really liked connecting with people that way, and it came pretty naturally. So while I was, learning and kind of exploring a few things, throughout my educational journey, I was always working, and so I spent a lot of time working in the Milwaukee especially like Milwaukee nonprofit community. So I've worked at especially in a development and education context.
Mhm.
So that tied in with my clinical training and experience really sort of underpins, those are sort of the beginning phases of CLARA, even though I didn't know what exactly that was going to look like and how that would shake out. And so I did wind up getting my master's in community psychology, which is something that I feel is a really, really great fit for me and how I practice. And that really kind of encompasses that three branches of service that we talked about, so that we serve people in context and cannot, we really believe that we cannot ignore the environment.
Mhm.
I remember one of my favorite professors, Dr. Kim Skirvin, shout out. She's had this analogy that she used about, how traditional therapy and psychotherapy is like, you picture a goldfish in a bowl, and the traditional contextual model is to, look at the fish as that the fish is sick and we have to treat the fish. And community psychology looks more at, no, this is the water is what's ill and sick, and then that's what contributes to the fish's experience. So I keep that in mind a lot when, just thinking about how CLARA exists in the world and how I want to exist in my practice. And I think our clients really appreciate that framework as well. So I spent a lot of time, as I was getting my training clinically, working in I worked in shelters, worked with a lot of youth, did youth work and programming, a lot of arts-based programming in the community, in-home therapy throughout all of the communities of Milwaukee. So I'm very, kind of like was very on the ground and in that way. And I actually didn't really envision going into private practice. It wasn't necessarily what was first on my mind when developing my training. I actually remember when I was wrapping up my master's program, thinking about going to get a PhD in public health, and just curious about epidemiology of mental health and things like that. But when I did, kind of take a risk and a chance on private practice, I really, really loved the independence and autonomy that you can have for like really having very deep person-centered relationships with your clients and really deeply understanding the community and the context that they're in. So working in private practice, I used to work at a group practice in the Whitefish Bay Shorewood area years ago. And I really loved it. I loved the work with the clients, especially at that time. I was seeing a lot of youth and families, kind of had like a mixed practice of maybe like 50% youth and families, 50% adults and couples. But what I started to feel like I maybe needed to ground myself in my community here in Tosa a little bit more, where my kids were going to school and, engaged. And I also, if anybody who's listening is involved in clinical work in any way, like being a therapist is very lonely, because you're with people all day, and you're holding space for people all day, but it's not necessarily, when you're working with them clinically, even though like our work is very relational and that's a big part of the healing component for us, it's not always bi-directional, as it shouldn't be. I'm there to serve my clients, right? And so we become very isolated as professionals. And so I loved working in private practice and being able to, have that creative license and independence to practice the way that I wanted and the way that I knew met the needs of my clients. But I also really missed having a collaborative team. And so with CLARA, I knew I wanted to have more of a collaborative model where we could be independent practitioners, but also kind of operate under the same umbrella of support and be able to consult with one another and learn from one another and develop programming. And the other thing I noticed is that, I was more and more, well, in private practice, I was referring folks to other holistic practitioners, so like yoga therapists, acupuncture, Reiki, things of that nature. And I was like, wouldn't that be great if that was like across the hall, So that was a really strong component of, our sort of first round of clinicians that we brought on to the team here was integrating those elements so that, people could kind of care for that mind, body, spirit connection, as I mentioned before. And really what I love and is part of the model as well is that we've really kind of developed into what I would call like a family practice. I love that we can see different members of family systems and support them from different angles. And because we have a collaborative model that allows us to, with the clients, consent permission to support them from a variety of different angles. And I think it really helps to destigmatize and create a really healthy narrative for mental health for like the whole family.
Awesome. I just love hearing your story, and I'm learning new things about you as you're talking, and like just excited to continue this conversation even after today, because I'm just learning so much. And I hear so many wonderful themes around community and context and collaboration and support. Yeah, it's just it's wonderful to hear that background and kind of how you came to this place. And I think for a lot of us, our path toward, our careers is not linear. There's a lot of, kind of self-discovery that happens along the way that sort of pushes us to the next thing, guides us to the next thing. And I just appreciate hearing your background and how you came to be part of this. And I want to say that I have my own personal experience at CLARA. I came to learn about CLARA. Kristin, you and I were both at the time part of a professional women's group. And I remember hearing your name and hearing about your practice through Emerging Women Leaders and the Tempo organization, and actually went to an art therapy group that was held at CLARA. That was sort of my first ever experience with art therapy in a group space.
Oh, I love it.
And just like, it was such a wonderful experience. And I think the themes that you're talking about as it relates to connection and collaboration and community and context were also coming through for me as someone who participated in that experience at CLARA. So it was phenomenal. So I'm excited that we're kind of spotlighting this great work. And you and I have worked together in the time that we've known each other. And so I'm really excited to hear from you kind of what it's been like to partner with MCW in the work that you do.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to hear it. Thank you so much for the mention of that group. And it was so shout out Amber. Amber is our community art therapist here who we developed that group together, and it's called the Radical Self-Love Group. Really love that group that focuses on sort of like the dismantling of diet, body, culture, emphasis on self-love for people of all ages and spaces in life. And especially what I do find is that many women like myself who are in midlife, who are, trying to unlearn some of the messages that have haunted us throughout our background, especially from like an intersectional framework where even more difficult for folks of color who are, are of a marginalized, other marginalized identities where they've been not given the same representation and access to positive and healthy stories about just like loving existing in your body, that like all bodies are good. So I'm so glad that you enjoyed
it was
that.
Awesome.
Yes.
It was awesome.
You mentioned that we were in that same, professional networking group, which, that's when I was like, how did I start, how did we connect? And I think that really speaks to a lot of our sort of community and strategic partnerships, is that they're pretty organic. Like typically sort of people will kind of see what we're doing, or we'll see what other folks are doing, and there'll be kind of like this little ping of like, oh, I could see how that connects. And what I really like is that I usually find that, there's like kind of inspiration on both sides. So and to answer that question more about the work that we've done, I was thinking about that question, like how to sort of distill that down a little bit. And I thought because we use art therapy so often, and that's essentially how we first connected with your department and your division of suicide research and healing, that I would show some images from the work that we've done to kind of tell that story a little bit. So Jai here, who's on the call, is going to open up a presentation that will help highlight that a little bit. So, just
thinking,
I'm sure it's like just waking up a little bit as, he's doing that, to kind of start answering your question of, what it's been like to partner with MCW. Is that I would describe it in a lot of ways. And one of those things was that it was like very organic and natural, just based on our collaboration and connections in the community. Was easy to see where a lot of our values and mission would overlap and connect, right? Also, it's been really inspiring. And what I said here is that it's really been able to very directly expand and enhance our clinical work with our clients in the community, the training of our clinicians. It's been the work that we've done, and the what I've been able to learn through the process of doing some of your postvention trainings and learning about that research, that has really impacted how our our clinicians operate, right? And then as well as our community programming. Jai, you can go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. And so what I did is I was thinking about like when I first connected with you, Sarah, that a lot of uh, a lot of the work that you and your team are already doing. And so I originally connected with Sarah, also Trisha Monroe, that's in your department, and JC Cant, and I believe Neil was a part of it at that time as well.
Yeah.
You were already doing all of this really great work in the community around the concept of postvention for, survivors of suicide loss. And that was something that, I was only really vaguely familiar with the concept and how that might look from like a suicide prevention framework. But once I started, brainstorming and collaborating with you all about what we might be able to do together and learning about all these different things, like postvention and then your MKE loss team and research initiative. I was like, oh, this is, what an awesome resource for survivors who have experienced this very isolating and stigmatizing traumatic experience. And so essentially, I believe when you first reached out, it was specifically about seeing if there were like art therapy or art-based community programming in the community that might be of support to some of the folks that get connected to you as survivors of suicide loss. And so on my end, that made a lot of sense that we would be able to partner in that way because you already had this great framework built. So all of these little, things here are the things that you already kind of had going that I felt like, oh, we could really just sort of build off of the roots that you already laid down from that. So learned a lot about, just sort of the model of postvention and why that is so effective, and learned about how data related to specific suicide loss for survivors comes to you and your department, and how you all work to connect those survivors to resources. And one of the things that, so clinical resources, community resources, mentorship, peer support, other support services that would be needed in a very, prolonged traumatic time like that, right? And so what I think we had originally started talking about was that, like, there are art therapists in the community, right, that you could refer people to, but it wasn't always clear, if they had that specialization in grief, and specifically suicide loss related grief, which is a very nuanced and important, it's a very specific and significant type of trauma that deserves its own clinical training. Absolutely. So we talked about how that's important to be able to, know what clinicians to refer to, but also that we could develop some specific support programming for some of your participants that you're already doing the work to create those relationships with. So I started attending your 414 Hope and Heal events. Is that something that you've been doing for a while?
This was our second year, so
Okay.
it's relatively new.
Okay,
Yeah. So
cool.
I think you were part of the very first one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that the Portland Institute, that was where the speakers, or the I think for the the second or third day of that training, you had these wonderful expert doctors from the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition come in and do this sort of master class on suicide loss related grief and working with survivors. And we've continued to engage with their trainings and their research, and their trainings are actually pretty foundational to the training that we now have for our team that's doing any of this clinical work for survivors. So it's been really cool. And it's helped me learn a lot about like the evaluation process for these programs, like what's considered best practice. And I remember Trisha, kind of introducing me to the work of Dr. Jack Jordan, which is very foundational for the clinical end of, what we want to look for, how we want to anchor ourselves theoretically in working with survivors, but also like measuring their outcomes. How do we know, that they're like, on a path towards healing, and that they are, developing some meaning from this experience, and they're starting to feel less isolated, and they're starting to feel more connected to their peers and their reality again, that they're sort of developing a narrative that brings them peace and helps their nervous system sort of settle into this new reality. It gave us a really good framework for working with that because it's a really, as anybody who's experienced losses like that, it's a lifelong journey, right? So, and then you specifically with your background in public health and being able to break down these kind of complex big data sets, it's been really nice to just kind of be able to like have a more realistic scope on like suicide related data and how it's impacting our community directly, like in Milwaukee County and in the communities that we serve. When in graduate school, we learn about that stuff in sort of thankfully in community psychology, we have a very, specific sort of place-based orientation, sort of macro or micro level sort of orientation to things. But I don't think that that's true for most programs. It's, super generalized. So, but that really helped me be able to like lean into that so that we could really more like tailor make and provide our programming to the community that we want to serve, right? So Jai, you can go ahead to this next slide. And so like I said, we were having these initial, preliminary conversations about how art therapy could kind of fit into this sort of menu of services and clinical connections and community organization connections that you were developing for your community service and research, right? If I'm understanding that the database that you keep of survivors is something that's used often for the research that you do is correct. And so it really kind of helps define these questions on what we needed to kind of figure out and tease out a little better, like, okay, what are the local resources? And what we learned is that there really not only are there not a whole lot of art therapy groups in the community here that specialize in suicide loss, survivors of suicide loss, but as a whole, it's not something that there's a ton of literature about. And so we thought that this would be a great opportunity to be able to expand upon that. And so that helped us sort of be able to learn about and connect with some of the other leaders in this field who are doing this work in other areas so we could integrate some of their best practices into what we're doing. You can go ahead to the next slide as well. Great. So when we were, doing our initial sort of like wide, kind of wide reach lit review on what this might look like and what already exists out in the world in terms of art therapy group support for survivors, what we found is that in the small amount of data that's out there, and the research focuses mostly on work with adults, and that's often complicated grief or like loss specific cohorts. So like cohorts where it's like I say that like specific to the loss itself or some other like identity orientation factors. So like that, for example, veteran survivors of suicide loss. So folks who lost friends, family, things like that while in service. There are groups for people who lost a spouse or lost a sibling, but not necessarily like a wide, kind of more generalized grief focus for the suicide loss experience. The child and adolescent suicide loss groups that we did see and learn about, those do exist. They often tend to they didn't have a full art therapy focus. They would often integrate things like skill building, like, kind of DBT, emotional regulation skill building, as well as psychoeducation. But a lot of like what we found in the art therapy world is that it focused on this open studio model with adults, which the open studio model is something in the art therapy world, which, kind of talks about like using like an open studio, like you got art supplies are there. You don't really get a lot of direction or prompt or anything like that. you just exist with it. And then you don't really do in that particular model a whole lot of active verbal processing. It's more about like witnessing the art process and art that others experience and create. So there is something really connective about it in just being in the same place with other survivors doing that and letting that be your voice. But this started to make us think a little bit more about how we wanted this to be a bit more directly relational. So like a process group, where it's sort of client facing, right? And folks can be communicating about this, and sharing their experiences so that they feel less isolated and less alone. And what some of the outcomes that we found in going through that literature is that, these groups of a variety of different contexts and approaches, there was a reduction in overall depression and psychological stress. People felt more understood. They felt a decreased sense of isolation. They reported feeling a bit like more altruistic and like finding meaning in this idea of being able to help others. There were improvements in their social validation scores, meaning that they could really, feel like they could identify with others and didn't feel so separate and disconnected from the rest of their, the systems that they once felt a part of. And they also reported having a more integrated memory of the deceased. So, in other words, like when they had memories of their deceased loved one or, the person in their life, it wasn't necessarily always, obviously anybody who's experienced grief has experienced the waves and stages and phases of that in different ways. But what we mean by integrated means that, you can sort of like live with that memory, you can find meaning from it and like work it into your daily experience where it doesn't sort of overhaul your entire life and kind of re-traumatize you every time it happens. And so, Jai, you can go to the next slide as well. Thank you. And so then from this point, I started developing what would be kind of like our pilot program for this. And what went into that was, curating the right clinical team that would work to bring this to fruition. So I mentioned Amber Thomas earlier. She is the lead facilitator for our group. And because she has that community focus, I knew that that would be a great fit for her. We have another clinician here, Adam, who co-facilitated with her. He also has a community psychology background and a lot of specific training in grief work and like sort of the spiritual side of grief work. But this gave us an opportunity to have him, Amber, and then also our therapy supervisor here, Brittany, who served as a consultant on this project to really kind of dive into the suicide loss research, specifically around art therapy. So we were able to take a lot of the things that you introduced to us through our work or through trainings to weave that directly in to our training process. And that also helped us refine our clinical focus. So it helped us be like, what do we really want to do with this group? What are the goals and objectives? How can we measure them? And maybe, how can we kind of create a more theoretical orientation and framework that we can kind of build upon that and really like look for signs and symbols that people are experiencing some of these like sort of healing variables that folks like Dr. Jordan proposed and things like that, that people that are really out in the community doing this clinical work helped us with intervention design and also just kind of served as external consultation. And it was able to help us to kind of look at this from a community context and how this might be able to fit in with, the survivors that you already have an ongoing relationship with.
Yeah.
And so, Jai, you can go to the next slide. That led us to develop our pilot group, which is called Creating Meaning After Loss. And it's an art therapy process group for survivors of suicide. And for this first round, we focused on adults. And so essentially, Sarah, you helped us with, you designed the, from what I understand, you kind of designed like the sort of pre-screening as well as helped with like the recruitment efforts using this database of folks that you have, varying levels of engagement with. So maybe some folks that your team has more active engagement with and some that maybe you just have their information, but you kind of put out, here's what we're doing this, art therapy group if you're interested in seeing if this is something that might help you with your loss, you can join that. And you were also able to gather some data through that experience, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
and then Jai, if you go back to the next slide, it was yep, that one. Yeah, that's perfect. I was like, where were? Um, then with that, we were able to kind of like, have this first round and work with the great data from the participants to begin with. And like I mentioned before, that like a lot of the other research that has been focused on in this field has been like specific to the loss itself. This one, we had a variety of experiences. So it was open to anyone who had experienced a loss from suicide. And so in that case, it could have been a family member, a partner. I think we actually, in this particular group, had like family folks from the same family system where, it was to one person, it was their partner, but to another, it was their parent. We had folks who where the loss was a child. We had folks that worked in the community and have experienced this as providers, service providers in different ways or spiritual providers. So it was really interesting and, a bit of like just a little bit of an unknown of like how that would all come together. And really the only, sort of limitation or, even just kind of criteria that we put on vetting that or filtering that would be to make sure that the loss wasn't so acute, that they would, that would be a better fit for maybe a little bit more of an active one-on-one, sort of clinical support experience. So these were all folks that the loss was 6 months, at least 6 months passed since the day of that loss. Um, and I'll show you now some of the photos from that first group experience. You can go to the next slide, Jai, please. Thank you. So Amber did this lovely job of sort of like, so this was hosted in the CLARA's library. That's what we call sort of our community space, it's where I am right now. I can see the books in the background, but it's not a huge space. It's kind of cozy, and we actually really like that for some of the groups that we do. And in this case, it really felt like we were sort of setting the table for people, and that's a real like core value of like the CLARA experience is like a lot of like we really appreciate the hospitality that we offer our clients, but it also made it so that like you're face to face with people. Like, yeah, you might be like working on this like art, process in front of you, but you're sharing art supplies with people and you're actually in pretty close proximity. And actually for like clinical support and healing support in this case, I think that was really important. And the group was also based upon collage was like sort of like the primary like medium or like idea that tied all of the sessions together. So every participant, got this mixed media sketchbook that they could use and kind of do all of their different projects and processes from the group in that, and then continue doing them on their own time and at home if they wanted to. You can go to the next one. And so, yeah, we talked about like just building community through proximity that often like, there wouldn't really be another situation where folks having these sort of, common experiences would be together and be able to like sort of learn from one another's experience what their healing process has been like. It's on the right, you can see that was another one of Amber's projects was like using watercolor and as like, a way to engage with the idea of like, kind of letting things be and not necessarily being in control of the art materials. And that really underpins like the sort of art therapy foundational values of like, this is much more about process than product. Anybody can do art therapy. It really is not about what it looks like or having any experience. I would say based on this group, I think like maybe like half and half, like half of the folks were like pretty creative, like people who like, oh, we already kind of have a creative practice or interested in that. And some other people that were like, I haven't done anything like this since I was a kid, and it wouldn't have necessarily been something I would do on my own, but I'm interested in trying because I've done other groups and I'd like a different, perspective on that. So that was really cool to see as well. And then you can go to the next slide. Perfect. And then Amber, for each group session, she provided Amber and Adam provided like reflection questions or sometimes bits of psychoeducation that were kind of based on some of like the contemporary suicide loss research of like, here's what we know about what healing might look like. They were provided these reflection questions or prompts and encouraged to create with the materials, sort of with like loose guidelines. And then they could discuss in just sort of a conversational way with the group. And it sounds like based on this particular group, I mean, it was like the art process just makes it so much less intimidating because you're with a group of people, but you don't have to necessarily just focus on what you're saying. You can say that in a variety of different ways, right? And so it sounds like it was really the conversation just flowed and it was a really good cohesive group. And then a lot of the folks that were a part of it continued to work in their journals, outside of the group and continue to do art between sessions, which was really cool to see as well. And you can go ahead to the next one. Right. Yeah. And what I also just wanted to mention is that in these groups, we wanted to kind of take like a more just sort of like general expressive arts approach. So, there was also writing exercises and blackout poetry, which is just like a really easy, non-intimidating, creative way to, play with language a little bit if that's, something that is, of interest to folks so that they can try different things. And I love this last one. It sounds like in this particular group, there's a real bonding experience and a real, just a relationship that developed. And I know that, a lot of the participants talked about wanting to create sort of like an alumni group, which we've kind of dabbled with the idea of maybe doing like a once a month like check-in sort of thing or having folks drop in if they want to. But at the back of the sketchbook, Amber had this idea to kind of make it like kind of like a yearbook, and like wishing each other like they're, wishing each other luck in their journey and their next steps on this. And we just thought that that was a really sweet and meaningful way to end and tie the group together. So you can go ahead to the next one. And so with as I mentioned, Sarah, uses can engage with these as opportunities to, kind of build your research data, inform your programming, and inform the work that you do with your participants. So with Amber and Adam being, from a clinical perspective, just some of the things that they observed is that they really saw like these ongoing community connections. A lot of folks that connected, were exchanging phone numbers and continuing conversations well past the group, which is really lovely for continuing to fight that isolation that can so often be a part of suicide loss. That people would remark on it being a safe space for sharing in a variety of different ways. Several participants, they shared that the group helped them to have more increased positive outlook about the future, and they were felt more ready to take some steps, in their lives that were outside of the grief experience, right? Like, I feel more ready to do another type of group to, focus on this or to make this change in my career. And that was a really cool, maybe a little bit unexpected outcome that we felt really proud of. And that many of the participants, even the ones who weren't necessarily identified as artists, were now we're going to continue doing this because this really has been a great, self-regulating and coping skill for us. And then Sarah, when you kind of, went through the data from our pre and post surveys, you pulled out some themes that emerged where, feeling a sense of closeness to one another, that there was this sense that, of establishing a new path for their healing and for life. That's a bit of moving into a new chapter post loss sort of thing. Feeling a sense of strength, kind of bolstered by now having this sort of community and seeing yourself among others who've experienced this. Someone reported learning about how wonderful people are, that increased positive affect and hope and connecting with others, and then just feeling more supported. We also wanted to note that there were, from a clinical perspective, there are folks that mentioned, suicidal ideation or self-harm tendencies, and that was something that, folks identified that they were no longer feeling at the end of the group. So we were really, really pleased to hear that. And you can go to the next one. And I wanted to just kind of like talk a little bit about like sort of what's come of this and what's coming next, or what I hope, we can continue to work on together, and just, either with MCW specifically, as well as like with our clients in the therapy room, in the community, but also in how we train and operate in our different systems that we're a part of. So Amber and I were able to come to the annual LOSS team conference, and LOSS is local outreach for survivors of suicide loss. So basically, what Sarah and her team are doing on sort of like a Milwaukee County research level, there's folks all over the country that are doing something similar. So we were able to connect with a lot of them and show them how we develop this program. And many folks are kind of consulting with us about how they can do something similar. Um, I then jumped on for Sarah, you and Trisha, your team did that 16-week postvention certificate, which was
Mhm.
really, really helpful for me to kind of better work with the data that we have from our clients and our community. And that is leading us to kind of what we hope for our next steps in planning some more specific postvention initiatives in Wauwatosa schools specifically. That's an area that we serve a lot of folks that are involved in that in some way, and it's something that has impacted our communities pretty at the ground level there. And then also taking our group and being able to modify it for adolescents and teens, as
Mhm.
that's a really very needed in the community. And you can go ahead to the next one. And I also just wanted to touch on how it's kind of impacted all these different, I mentioned the 3 branches of service, and one of them being our Wisdom Collective. That's where we do some of our e-courses and trainings, and actually how a lot of the information that, has been shared by your team has worked its way into how Chris and I, so Chris is my husband, Dr. Chris Belkofer, who is an art therapist, and I believe might be on this call right now still with his class. He is the lead facilitator for this e-course that we put out. And how I think if I hadn't have engaged in the postvention work and research in the way that Sarah, your team has kind of connected us to it, I would have maybe not have the angle on suicide prevention and postvention maybe wouldn't have been quite as rich in this area. So it's really informed how we want to talk to parents and coach and provide education for the parents and the families that we serve, as well as the school districts. And I think that that's it for the spread for the what do you call it, slideshow. So you can bring us back. So that was my trying to be all encompassing in like what it's been like and what it's looked like and felt like to partner with MCW in this way.
Thank you so much for that in-depth snapshot of, the work that we've done together. It's been, I think, so beneficial for us as well. And I know for our suicide loss survivors who are looking for other ways to, again, create that meaning and that healing in this post-loss journey. It's really been such a game changer, I know, for folks. And so I'm really, really happy that this partnership is continuing and that we are going to continue to hopefully support that growth and that healing in the community. I know that we only have 3 minutes left. I looked at the clock and I was like, oh my gosh, this hour went so
It
fast.
goes so
It
fast,
goes so
yes.
fast. But I want to make sure that I leave space for you to just give information to folks that are on the call about how they can maybe support CLARA Institute or how they might be able to engage with you.
Absolutely. So, we're really easy to find on, via our website or social media. Just, you can look up clarahealinginstitute.com, CLARA. It's on all caps is how we sort of stylize it, but you can find us in a variety of different ways. And I know that they had a QR code as well that you can reach out if a way that you can support us. One of our favorite ways is to just share about us in the community. That's part of our model, is to try to decrease the stigma as one of the main barriers for people taking that first step to come to therapy. And so when people know that they can get a better sense of what we do here and how it might feel to be here, that this is not a sterile clinical environment. It's fun and creative and playful that, yeah, I had to do the same.
Right,
It's
my
dark
lights are
over
going
here.
off, so
I was like, I
yeah,
thought I was moving, but maybe not
yeah.
enough. So just sharing this with people, and if you know if folks are saying that they're struggling in a variety of different ways, we have a really a trauma focus here, as well as a somatic therapies focus. And as many of you know, that it's just, people are just really struggling right now with the socio-political environment that we're in and the existential dread that comes along with it. So please share that we are here as a resource for individual therapy or beyond, or to come to their organizations or communities in some other meaningful way. And that also, check out the Wisdom Collective area of our website, where we have some of that programming about helping support parents in helping educate them about the reality of the digital world, the good, the bad, and the neutral of that experience for their kids. It's something that I think many of my clients and many of us are kind of continuously navigating this unknown world that continues to grow. So yeah, those would be great ways to support what we do here.
Well, thank you so much for being
Thank
here and for taking
you.
this time and for
Of
sharing
course.
all of the amazing work you do. I see Jessica has popped back on camera, so I'm going to turn it over to her to kick us out, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you both for spending this hour with us and sharing
Of
about the work that you're
course.
doing. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us today. We are grateful for you. And we also like to invite you to our next Spotlight session on February 25th, if I am correct. Yes, February 25th, we will see you again. We will be highlighting Courage Plus. More details to follow in the next few days. Thank you again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me.